And let me introduce to you Metten, psychiatrist at the UMC Utrecht.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for showing up at in such huge numbers. I was a bit worried that Saturday morning, even though 9:30 is not really super early, might be a access barrier to this panel discussion. And access barriers is also what we're going to be talking about. My name is, as Timo already mentioned, Metten. I'm a psychiatrist at the University Medical Center in Utrecht. I've been involved in psilocybin research in treatment-resistant depression together with Compass Pathways, and I will also be involved in the phase 3 trial. But the reason that I'm standing here is because of my involvement in our Dutch platform for psychedelics in psychiatry, which is a sort of subunit of the Dutch Society for Psychiatry. It's a lot of words, but it means that we're sort of a formal small island within a society in which the discussion about the potential application of psychedelics in psychiatry can take place. And one of the things that we are currently thinking about is how we as psychiatrists and other registered mental health care professionals should relate to the fact that there is a lot of news about the potential efficacy and effectiveness of psychedelic treatments globally, but that as of current are actually, well, very, very limited, up to almost non-legal ways to actually provide this type of treatment to our patients. And we thought it would be interesting to have a discussion about this with guests from countries who did find a way to sort of circumvene this situation where no registration of these type of compounds has taken place yet. And yeah, obviously we have been thinking about this in the light of, well, the potential approval of MDMA therapy for PTSD in the US. Well, we all know that this may be delayed slightly, but I still think that the pressure that we will experience in our treatment rooms because of patients coming in with high expectations from all these types of treatment that are being talked about in media will keep us busy increasingly for the coming time. So yeah, hopefully we can come up with ideas how we as mental health care professionals should manage that, and also if there are some ways to work around the barriers that we currently face. So for this, I think we have an excellent panel put together, and I will introduce the four to you. You can already sort of see them behind me. We have two guests from the Netherlands who are, well, very familiar with the situation we have here and represent Europe in that way, or the EU in that way. And we have a guest from Switzerland and a guest from Canada. I will start with Alex Lethen. He's a Dutchman. He's the founder of the organization Made Life, and their goal is to address various issues in mental health care through all sorts of challenges. He has a very personal reason for actually founding this institution that he will shortly disclose to you. Then next to him we have my colleague Renske Blom, who is also a coordinator of the platform that I just briefly talked about. She is a psychiatrist at the Netherlands Psychoanalytic Institute in Amsterdam, and she is also a therapist in the aforementioned Compass trials on PTSD in treatment-resistant depression. Then next to her is Houman Farzin, that you maybe already saw yesterday. He is a palliative care doctor from Canada and also a palliative care physician and also a family doctor from Montreal. He works at the Jewish General Hospital in Montreal, and he is also a lecturer at McGill Medical School. He's trained in various psychedelic therapies, MDMA, ketamine, psilocybin, and well, as you may be aware, he has treated, for example, several cancer patients that suffered from existential distress using psilocybin. So he's an excellent expert to have on board for this discussion. And then finally, next to him is Julia King-Olivier. She is a psychiatrist and psychotherapist from Switzerland. She has a certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapy and research from the California Institute of Integrated Studies, and is also a certified MAPS therapist. And most importantly, she is the founder of the Compassionate Care Center in Geneva, where Swiss residents can actually receive psychedelic therapy under, well, the situation that they have constructed together in Switzerland. The panel is a panel, but it has a slightly different structure. We will start with a brief introduction by Alex and Renske, and then we have 2 short presentations by Houman and Julia on their respective situations. And after that, we immediately want to go into the discussion, but not only with the 4 of us. We would appreciate it to immediately invite you, the audience, to discuss with us and talk with us. And that is also where the talkbox moderator jumps in to help us with the discussion. So I will give the floor to the 4 of you, starting with Alex. Maybe you can share something with us about your personal reasons for being on the panel.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for being here. So my personal story, I typically call that catch-22. So 2 years ago, I was also here, and the situation was that I was just desperately looking for help for my daughter. So she was, as we say in Dutch, uitbehandeld, in English, treatment-resistant, after a couple of years of therapy and SSRIs and things like that. And I was at the end of the rope, and she was at the end of the rope, and I stumbled across this domain, and I figured, you know what, there are no other medicines, no other therapies available, so let's see what help I can get here. And I found myself and my daughter in a catch-22 situation. So above ground, everybody who was a licensed medical professional felt really sorry for me, very empathetic, but although truffles is legal in the Netherlands, the therapy is a gray area. So they didn't feel they could help me without risk of losing their license. So that was above ground. Underground, very, very nice trip sitters, shamans, etc. Also very, very well-meaning people. However, their expertise is very much in terms of personal self-exploration. So they felt very uneasy about the medical state of my daughter. Severe OCD, anorectic, etc. So they also wished me good luck, to say it cynically. And a few weeks later, she passed. So that is my personal story. So if you look at Europe, if you look at the Netherlands, there's about 200,000 people that are deemed treatment resistant. In Europe, there's over 10 million, and she's just one of them. I'm not saying all will pass, but there's a very, very chronic situation. And in the Netherlands, we haven't been able to solve it. So yesterday, this state committee report was published, so I'm now hoping that will solve something. And for me, personally, it's very frustrating. You could also argue very angering to see that other countries like Canada and Switzerland have solved it in a particular manner, and we're still struggling to solve it. So that is my interest here today, to find out from you how you've solved it, but also from, as the Americans would say, y'all, how we could collectively also solve this in the Netherlands. So that is my personal story and my reason for being interested in this field as a last resort. How do we solve this?
Thank you very much, Alex, for sharing your very personal story. Renske, is this something you can reflect on? Is this something you recognize from your treatment room?
Yes, I can reflect on that. And I feel for this, Alex. It's a lot. Your daughter and many of my patients are at this point of time not able to access psychedelic treatment or psychedelic therapy. We as psychiatrists, we acknowledge the existence of the spiritual and ceremonial and religious and even recreational use of psychedelics. We hear a lot about this, and we're integrated in that field. But still, patients of mine, treatment-resistant patients that are at this point of time at the waiting list for euthanasia, are at this point of time not able to access the medical use of psychedelics. And that's why I'm also here right now, not to integrate in some underground therapies, but I would love these substances somehow to be available upground, covered by medical insurance, accessible for all, also people with lower socioeconomical status. And that we can train our colleagues the best we can. So, yeah.
Thank you. Then I suggest that we move on to hearing how this potentially can be done, at least in Switzerland and Canada. And we will start with Julia's account from Switzerland, since you have the longest experience with actually doing this. So please go ahead. You want to be here?
Perhaps not personally. Will it show up on the? I just press the button.
I think this is.
No, that's.
No,
I'm just going to go like that.
It should show up. It should be green, but there are 3 green buttons, I think.
There we go. Okay.
Oh yeah.
All right, so hang on.
Yeah.
There we go.
Can you see it sufficiently?
Yeah, there's Switzerland, everybody. It's very pretty. Please come and visit. So I thought I'd share a little bit about the regulatory framework of our program in Switzerland.
I think maybe one practical thing that I noticed when you spoke, is it audible enough, or should we talk closer to the mic? Close to the mic?
Hello?
Okay, yeah, please keep it closer. Talk closer to the mic.
There we go. My shyness is coming out. I'm a stealth shy person. Okay, so here we go. So I don't have any disclosures. I would like to thank 2 people, though. I'd like to thank Peter Gasser. It's a very moving time right now. He's just retiring from his long-standing tenure at the SEPT, and he's what we call a psychedelic elder. And he took some time to review my presentation, make sure that I was getting my numbers right. And I also want to thank Gabriel Torrance of the HUG Hospital, who really opened up his files to help me do this presentation, and also Cyril Petigna, who helped me put these slides together. So here we go. So the regulatory framework in Switzerland is that since 2014, but it's a longer story, but since 2014, we have these sort of compassionate use statutes on our books. And it allows doctors such as myself to write to the Federal Office of Public Health and make a case. It takes me about 5 pages, and I have to prove that, number 1, the patient has a bona fide diagnosis for which conventional therapies have been tried and proven ineffective. I have to show that there's good scientific evidence to support that my hypothesis that a psychedelic-assisted therapy would be useful for that person. And also I have to show that they've had a significant negative life impact because of their diagnosis. And those of us doing it, in 2021, when I began, after I'd done some training, Matthias Lechty told me I was the 19th therapist to be receiving these special licenses. They're patient by patient. And since that time, it's almost like gremlins and getting wet, you know. We've been doubling, and now we're 70 doctors. And what else is up there? Oh, yes, so we've got about several, what do we have? About 5,000 treatments, and about 1,000 patients have benefited from these therapies since 2014. And what's interesting about that is this picture, in that it's not just university hospitals. So in the middle slide of Switzerland, you'll see all the university hospitals. There are 5 of them who are practicing this. The HUG hospital is particularly interesting because they have a program that's not research. It's just therapy. And then on the top slide, the top part of the slide there, that's all the private practitioners. And we have this thing called the Rösti-Graben in Switzerland, which is this kind of imaginary line that separates the Italian, French, and German regions. And it used to be that it was only Swiss-German doctors that were doing this, but now from the other linguistic regions, we're catching up. And then we have these amazing student associations, and they're really the future. They're going to be here in a few years. And so I wanted to honor those. And then we have some professional societies. So that's really how, that's what it looks like in 1,000, you know, a picture saying 1,000 words. I wanted to talk about the HUG hospital example, because I think it really is poignant. So they've been doing this program for about 4 years now. And in that time, they've received over 3,000 emails from patients. They only work with 2 substances, with LSD and psilocybin. They don't work with MDMA, because in Switzerland we can work with psilocybin, LSD, MDMA. I can also work with ketamine, and I'm hoping to train with cannabis soon. I hope that doesn't make me sound like a kid in a candy shop, because it's really not it at all. It's a very serious program. But so they received over 3,000 emails, and they only filled out about 200, how many was it? 230 applications. So, and they're 10% of what's being done in Switzerland with this work. And then maybe it would be another 10-to-1 ratio. I've been working since 2021 in a private practice, and I've seen somewhere between 20 and 30 patients for 100 sessions. So it gives you an idea of the scale of how this works. And when I first mentioned this to Alex, he's like, so what happens to the 3,000 other people who don't get a license for this? You know, it is a question. So what else is, I can't see all the way down there, sorry everyone. So yeah, so it's a huge demand, and they do a triage, and it's a little, they have quite an organigram. There's a fellow named Federico Seragnoli who's around. He's from the HUG hospital, and he could tell you more about their program and how they do the triage. And then what else do I have on here? No, that we don't need to do. So hang on, how do I go forwards to Houman's slides? Help.
Great, thank you very much,
You're welcome.
Julia. And we proceed to Houman, of course.
Great, thanks. I'll get up. Yeah, so these slides aren't mine. They're from one of the Therasil prescriber trainings we do. So for my disclosures, I had a talk yesterday morning that I would encourage you to view. So the experience in Canada is actually very similar to Switzerland. From my understanding, we're the second country in the world to sort of have this model roll out in a very similar fashion. I'll point out some of the differences. So the way it started is that in 2020, there was a 100-day advocacy campaign led by Therasil, which is a nonprofit advocacy and now training organization. And so 4 patients who were facing a terminal illness were eventually granted access to psilocybin via what's called a Section 56 exemption to the criminal code. And so in that context, the patient is pleading to the government, to Health Canada, which is the equivalent of the FDA, for access to something that is illegal. And this is not a medication. This is not like medical-grade psilocybin. This is magic mushrooms bought illegally. And so this is how the process started, that 4 patients were granted access with the support of a healthcare professional, but direct patient access. And so the first few patients were treated that way, and there was a flood of demand. And so what happened after that is that they used this existing special access program, which is for medications. So this is for doctors, prescribers, requesting a medication that is not yet approved. And so they added psilocybin and MDMA to the special access program, and then this way it became an actual medical act, responsibility shifted to the physician, and they essentially allowed these licensed producers of psilocybin and MDMA, which are small pharmaceutical companies that apply for a license, to then give access to patients. So in a very similar way, we fill out an application and justify based on what evidence we're going to use this for. One of the differences is that we have to choose what medication we're giving, what dose, how many times. We don't have the flexibility to sort of experiment. So with this system, patients are now being treated, I would say the numbers are in the hundreds range across Canada. And you know, I think this pretty much summarizes the situation. I mean, the reality is the patients are very ill, so severe, refractory, treatment-resistant, or at the end of life. And you know, you have to prove on your application all the points mentioned. And really, I'll just end by saying the way they have it structured is that you have to fall into 2 categories. You're either at the end of life, or you have major depressive disorder, treatment-resistant, refractory. And so one of the challenges we have with that, I have a case right now of a patient who's technically in remission from his cancer, and he actually meets criteria for both categories, but I'm applying under end-of-life distress because of the nature of his suffering, and they don't want to approve it under that because he's not actually dying. And so that's one of the issues. They're saying that it has to be a medical emergency to grant access under end-of-life distress, and I'm arguing that if you're actually dying, you're too sick to receive the medication, so there's no real medical emergency, otherwise you have to be in the emergency room. And so, yeah, that's sort of where things are now, and we can continue the discussion after.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, this is very fascinating. I didn't get the point that you now address. I thought that psilocybin in Canada was only available to end-of-life distress, but it is also available to people suffering from treatment-resistant depression, provided that they meet all these criteria.
Yeah, exactly. They just give you a harder time. They want to make sure everything has been tried, from ketamine to TMS to ECT. Yeah, so they push for that, and we push back. It's really like a back and forth advocacy at times, saying that there's no access to ECT, or let's say wait times are long, or that the patient doesn't want to engage in that.
And if I understand it correctly, there is some sort of system to actually systematically report adverse events. They are required to report that to...
Yeah, exactly. There's no like central monitoring, but the physician has to write a report back a few months later and just sort of report what happened, what the response was. And what's interesting, I'll add, is that the patient is actually not identified to Health Canada. So we just give the birthday and initials. So there's like this degree of confidentiality, which is really interesting.
Oh, that's interesting indeed. And do I understand correctly that there is some sort of insurance coverage for it? The patient does not need to pay for it by himself?
No, so what's happened in Canada is that for psilocybin, the licensed manufacturers have donated the medicine. So they haven't charged it. And then for like the therapy hours, everything is private, so nothing is covered except in Quebec, where us with the body of family doctors convinced the regulatory authorities to pay for our time doing therapy. So anyone besides us family doctors billing for psychedelic psychotherapy will charge cash. The therapy hours outside of the psychedelic session are often billed under just regular psychotherapy. With MDMA, there's only one manufacturer currently, and they're actually charging for their MDMA, and it's quite expensive. But there are others that are applying, and hopefully they'll be able to offer it for free in this compassionate access framework.
Okay. And so if I hear it correctly, it still requires quite a bit of negotiation from individual doctors or institutions with their respective regional authorities.
Yeah, it's a federal body. So we're arguing with the federal government, but there's active advocacy, thousands of people wanting to apply that aren't getting qualified. Right now, actually, there's an active case with cluster headaches, trying to get access to psilocybin, and we're literally taking the government to court. And so there was a breakthrough, and we're waiting for a final decision. You know, and that's how it's been. We've been fighting and then granting access, opening pathways, so it's an ongoing struggle back and forth.
Okay. And if I've understood this correctly, I already mentioned this at the beginning, the tradition in Switzerland is much more long-lasting. So I have the idea that the routes through which this became integrated in the Swiss system is very different from how it now is in Canada. Is that true? And what I actually mean is, when it started out in Switzerland, did the bodies require a lot of evidence to actually show that you can do this type of treatment? How did that go?
I like to quip that LSD is as Swiss as chocolate, to begin with. Even more so.
Yeah, you have even a much longer tradition.
But after 1943 and Bicycle Day and all those things, Peter Gasser shared a really beautiful story. This was Albert Hofmann's birthday, 100th birthday in 2006, a huge gathering like this one. And there was a petition, a letter that was written to Pascal Couchepin at the time by everyone who was present. And that's what really kicked off the research once more. So those letters are really powerful. And so that's one thing. And these laws have been in place since 2014. And initially, it was really a small group of researchers doing MAPS-type studies and what have you. Peter was one of them, Peter Owen, another one, in Franz Vollenweider in Zurich. Really some beautiful, beautiful research. We didn't have quite as strong a moratorium as in America or elsewhere. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if you also meant this by the LSD being as Swiss as chocolate thing, but was as Swiss as chocolate. But do you also mean that LSD at some point has been registered in Switzerland as a drug? Or
So no, we're very similar with the Canadian system. We do have so there's a gatekeeper. It's Matthias Liechti. So if I want to order the substances that I'm going to use in my office, these are not registered medications yet. I send a letter to him. However, it's after I've received the special license, which is patient by patient, and the Federal Office of Public Health knows each patient. That's for sure. Yeah. And then through that, I order the medication. Yeah.
And then never in the past there has been a registration for LSD or for psilocybin?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, Matthias would be able to tell you more precisely that he's around somewhere.
Yeah, he's the gatekeeper of all
Auschwitz. He's a good gatekeeper. It's wonderful. I mean, if I have a question, because this is science that I went to medical school and I like psychopharmacology very much, but interactions with these 3 substances and medications with end-of-life distress, they have, what is the interaction between alectinib and psilocybin? I mean, where do you find that in a book? I can write to Matthias Liechti and ask him, It's pretty wonderul, that.
Nice. And Houman, please go ahead.
So we spoke about Canada and reimbursement. What's the situation like for reimbursement in Switzerland?
So we're on it. There's a special interest group now that's been formed. Peter Gasser, Helen Eicher, a whole bunch of sort of the elders and the younger, la relève, as we'd say in French, are together, and we're going to be working now to see if we can develop a billing code for it, but there hasn't been a billing code for it. And so yeah.
And that means that who pays for it now?
The patient pays for it now.
The patient.
Yeah,
so
they have to pay for their medication. The medication's quite expensive, like in Canada, what you're saying. Yeah.
So the demographic of the patients is also the affluent ones, or are they being sponsored, or what do you see there?
I would say that most of us work with sliding scales, firstly. We do a lot of groups. Peter Gasser is it's just so beautiful, his work, his life's work, and he does groups of palliative care patients with end-of-life distress. I think that makes Peter Owens likewise, and that's what Bianca King and myself are doing now. We're moving up to groups. We need to have some individual therapy practice, I say I've been training all my life to do this. I'll be training the rest of my life to do this. I'll be training into my next life to do this. I mean, it's, but we wanted to get we were wet behind our ears, so we started with individual patients first, and now we're moving up to groups now.
Just a question to you and to the audience, right? So question to the two of you and a question to the audience. So if you were to solve this for the Netherlands or make a wider context for countries where this is not available yet, what advice would you have?
Yeah, so just to clarify on the billing situation, so I mean, Canada is this massive country, and you have these provinces and territories, and each of them have their own system. It's usually the provincial body that pays the physician, but the laws with access are federal. And so in Canada, in Quebec, only us family doctors were able to argue and use an existing billing code for a mental health intervention. So we actually initially tried creating a new code and are still fighting for that, but they allowed us to use an existing code for mental health intervention for psychedelic therapy approved through Health Canada that can go up to 9 hours, basically, for one session. So one of the things I want to say is it's a work in progress, constant advocacy, and it's not like it's a done deal. And I think so that's one of the things to keep in mind is that you have to constantly advocate, educate, gather, and communicate that. the thing that I heard in the talk yesterday, the gentleman mentioned that in Holland you can't use compassionate access for a medication that's not under review. So you have to figure out like how that can be introduced into there. Just an example that comes to mind with Canada is the Section 56 exemption that was given to psilocybin that is now moved to the Special Access Program. It was the path of legalization of cannabis in Canada. So the first cases of legal access to cannabis were Section 56 to terminal patients, and now it's like open recreationally. So it's a matter of, I think, fighting and you know, communicating, gathering, getting signatures and things like that.
A really very active process that involves many different parties, if I understand it.
Yeah, it's the whole community. It's your side, the professional side, and then having legal sort of battles. I don't know what the legal system here is, but over there we have lawyers that are volunteering to help with the cause.
So that's very interesting.
What I'd say also is, what's specific to Switzerland, is that it's not one substance for one indication. Like in Australia, you can only give MDMA for PTSD, psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. Whereas in Switzerland, we can just make a case, in the similar paperwork to yours, then I can give psilocybin for end-of-life distress, or I can give MDMA for end-of-life distress. You know, I just have to make a case for it, and we can switch from one substance to another as well along the way. So I think one of the things that because we're writing now a letter of advocacy for Australia, because they want to widen the indications to include psilocybin for end-of-life distress. I mean, it's a huge population in need, and it also would widen the type of doctor that could prescribe it from just psychiatrists to also including palliative care physicians and so on. I think these are tweaks that I think the Swiss got right, that any doctor, I mean, you have to show that you've done training, first do no harm, but any doctor can make a case and then for any substance, for any indication, as long as they've really made their case. And that's really something that I think we got right, that would bode well for other countries thinking about it.
I think this is a very interesting distinction also, and it would also be one question I have for Houman before I ask Renske and Alex to reflect on this, and then ask the audience what they think about this. That is, it seems that in Switzerland there is a different appreciation of the evidence that's required before actually moving towards allowing a substance or a type of treatment to be used for a certain condition, whereas in Canada it seems more restricted to the conditions that are being under investigation. We had a comparable discussion on Wednesday at the PATH day with Paul Lethen from Australia, who reported that in the judgment of whether or not this should be allowed, the authorities basically looked at the evidence from the MAPS trials and the COMPASS trials, and that was apparently sufficient evidence to actually do this. Was that sort of comparable in Canada? Was that also the evidence that was used to allow this, or were different studies used, or different insights?
It seems Canada is a bit more strict. I think part of the issue is that this is not a specialized program for psychedelics. This is a general access program. So if you want to get chemotherapy medications, or back in the day if you wanted HIV medications, you just submit evidence and you have these sort of non-specialized pharmacists mainly reviewing these applications. And so you really do need to have high quality evidence. That's why for like cluster headaches as an example, there is a bunch of evidence, they're just not that high quality, so they keep refusing it. And so they are very strict. You really have to replicate, you know, based on a high level study. And I think, yeah, that's the issue, is that it does create a lot of restriction, and they're not up to date. You know, they don't know that like this report came out and the other report last week on MDMA, and so they just look at the paper and they give you an answer, and then you can like argue with them.
Yeah. And then for psilocybin in end-of-life anxiety, were, for example, the Ross and Griffiths trials used, or was it more, as you said in your talk yesterday, if you have the right to die, you have the right to try?
No,
also?
that is actually those papers. So
Okay.
those
Those
two
were the
key
papers.
papers, but actually what we prepare now is multiple pages, like probably like 50 articles in there. We just like bombard them with all the evidence out there. It's like, yeah, it's pretty intense.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to reflect on that. because we recently visited the European Medical Agency for a workshop on psychedelics. It's 1.5 day. And from there, it's still unclear what kind of evidence needs to be provided. I'd love to bombarding though, just still sending evidence over all the time. I'd love to. I'd also love some volunteer lawyers, if they're here present. Because yeah, I sometimes personally get accused that I'm not fighting for it or something, but it's so hard. And we need each other. We need like a community of advocates for this, because you can't fight on your own, right? That would be depressive. Yeah, I could talk for hours, but I would allow the time for the public maybe also to jump in, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Reflection of Alex.
I would like to tap into the wisdom of the crowd. Just imagine this is all mycelium. Okay, I expected a better response. Good, that's the one I was expecting. Any lawyers in the room?
Sorry?
Lawyers in the room? I can't see any. But I would like to understand from you, rather than seeing us as the experts, I'm certainly no expert, what can we do to overcome this situation?
I do see fingers up. Yeah.
30 minutes left. If you ask the question, please give it back to me, then I will give it to the next person.
Thank you for this interesting panel. I work as a guide and I work in Albania. There is no any of these structures that you discuss in my country, nor is there very much interest in changing them or the infrastructures to do so. Yet we are in the situation of criminalization because, at the end of the day, because of a UN convention, right, that was introduced because of a US-centric war on drugs. And I'm wondering, and we've been talking a lot about gatekeeping in this panel, and I'm wondering whether the methods that are being employed, which I think are admirable and important, in using a medical discourse in order to open up access to these medicines, is not eventually also a form of gatekeeping, namely keeping it within a strictly medicalized environment. And I'm wondering how we can think about, getting rid of that convention, because it has an enormous influence in countries that are non-Western, that do not have the infrastructures and advocacy bodies that you in your countries have in order to change legal structures there. They just simply copy whatever the UN or the EU says.
That's a great question. One of the things I just want to say is that I think establishing a nonprofit type organization has been key, like MAPS and Therasil, and so that is just one thing that is useful in countries that would allow actual activity. But what I would say is that we can look at Oregon, for example, as a model that was inclusive of that. So what they said is, we're not going to make this medical. Anyone with a bachelor's, with a high school diploma, can do 100 and something hours of training and become a facilitator. And you can't call it medical therapy. So you can be a healthcare professional that does the training and offers it, but not in the context of therapy. So that's an example of one jurisdiction that was able to be inclusive of the underground, or however we want to term that.
I'd say that's one of the things I really liked about the program that I attended at the California Institute of Integral Studies. They really opened up their training to chaplains, and you didn't just need to be a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist or a psychologist. They really were opening up to training other professions, and yeah, chaplaincy is important, I think.
I'll add one more point, and that is that you do want a certain level of accounting. In this power differential dynamic, whether you're a healthcare professional or not, someone's under the influence of a substance, and there's high potential for abuse, as we've seen. So there is a degree of accountability required, background checks, things of that nature. And so what I was saying yesterday is that in, let's say, indigenous cultures, you have this lifelong training process. The whole community is involved, and so there's a degree of accountability. And so that's the issue with siloed, non-structured systems. So because we don't have that culture ingrained, we have to build it.
Yeah, and there's also a differentiation to be made about the worried well, a kind of normal, healthy people, and also the treatment-resistant patients we are treating. Because as we saw in the psilocybin trial for treatment-resistant depression, our patients tend to need more care than the worried well taking psychedelics. You're like, yes. So we saw more dissociation, more depression, more aftercare needed. So I think that's also why we also love to, integrate this into a medical model to be able to treat those patients in need.
So the moved over there. Go ahead.
So I like the previous question, but staying within the medical kind of focus here, I was wondering, for the people who are working in a country where they have access, how much responsibility do you feel to kind of collect data on what you're doing?
Okay, so does this speak? Can you hear me? So yeah, in Switzerland, similarly to in Canada, well, firstly, the responsibility stops here. The doctor who receives the special exemption is responsible for the patient. I can have a co-therapist, but the responsibility is mine. That includes storing the medication properly in my office. It's a whole thing. I mean, my office is not quite Fort Knox, but I did have to fortify it quite a bit compared to before. And in terms of data collection, so in a private practice, I mean, I'm not a study, but if you look on the SEPT website, this is the Schweizerisches, I'm not going to be able to say it here, but SAPT, you'll find actually Yasmin Schmid's, all the follow-up and during, and post data collection that we have to do. And after we've treated a patient, we have to write back to the Federal Office of Public Health and give an accounting of what took place, when, how it went, why. If there's any adverse event, obviously we have to signal that immediately. Again, Matthias Lechty is just such a precious resource, because there are things that aren't written in research yet. My oldest patient is 97 years old, so tenterhooks going with that. Or I have patients with gastric bypass surgeries. It's how the synetics or the kinetics are going to work with that kind of scenario. It's not. I don't find research yet. So that's why it's so important in Switzerland. We work interconnectedly, and we give feedback to each other so that we can get this right. Nobody working in a silo format will get this right. We will only get this right if we work together. So yeah, and so it's really important for people like to do case reports. Really, please, write case reports. It's so important. I wish there were more hours in the day so I could write some, but yeah.
Yeah, so for us, there is also no central mandatory, bookkeeping, but again, the responsibility is on us. So like we publish case reports, narrative reports. There is an effort to sort of, let's say from Therasil as a nonprofit, centralize all the data, because the protocols, they're not like officially approved, but in them we ask for the questionnaires and scales to be filled. So the data is there, but it hasn't been organized. Another example is one of the licensed producers actually has their own system. So they send a questionnaire, they keep track, but I think it's a good point that we should be collecting this data, and every individual practicing should be publishing as much as possible.
Another question in front. Yes.
Hi, I'm Raoul from the Open Foundation, also working for the Jelinek, an addiction care facility in Amsterdam and other cities. I'd like to get back to your question, or your, Alex. what we see at the addiction care facility is that people ask us questions about medical use of drugs. We get a lot of general questions, but also for medical use. And we see also that people come into the drug checking service to have their illegal drugs tested for medical use. And also at Open, we see people that have questions about the illegal use or for medical use, but there's no options yet legally. So what I think is we need some sort of a body that can answer these questions, because at the Jelinek we have some information, we have some knowledge, but we can't answer all the questions. And I think that counts for other countries as well. Like, you need somebody that can answer all these questions, that can even give a harm reduction advice to people that want to use it illegally. I don't know exactly who will be able to do that or in what way. But maybe the panel can give some insights on what they think would be important for that body what kind of knowledge does it need, who needs to be involved, and what kind of information can we give?
I was handed the mic. Thank you, Raoul, for pointing this important question and statement. I think maybe starting off would be something to actually collect all of those questions and how many there are. And this will also, again, represent the unmet need for people seeking help. So collecting them and presenting them would be a case. And also working together as psychiatrists, psychotherapists, and prevention workers. We could, of course, come up with a document of things that are needed. And I'm still going to read the whole MDMA State Committee, 230 pages, and I hope to, again, reflect on that and help see what's possible right now.
And maybe I could just say also, I was really impressed with what Imperial College does with these patient feedback, patient-driven initiatives. I think they call it PIP. I'm not going to get the initials right, but also one of the things I forgot on the slide is a patient organization. And I think we get it right when I learn the most from my patients. They're my first teachers. And so I really think patient-driven organizations, not only for advocacy, to spread the word and get this legalized in various countries, but especially to get it right. They know, my first teacher in medicine said, always ask your patient what he thinks he has. You're going to see 9 times out of 10, he's right. So, I think we need to involve the patients in some sort of structured way in this process. And in Switzerland, we have, I forgot to put it, but we have a patient organization. So.
I think the conference here is very much under like a hypnosis, as if the decision about these psychedelics will be based on evidence. I think the fact is that political decisions are not evidence-based. And the Constitution of the European Union allows for initiatives from the public, from the citizens. And we are thinking, if we think we can get this through by having people like the people on the universities making more reports, I don't think we're getting it right. And I think we need to start somewhere else. And one of the places that I'm thinking about, I'm a psychologist from Copenhagen, trained in CIAS and MAPS, so I have some experience with this. I really think that we need to start to spread the techniques and methods and just spread out the practice so that there'll be a popular opinion and a popular voice about these things, not just from these discussions with scientists and papers and all these nice things. And so I basically think we need to start different kinds of education programs, and I think pan-European initiatives for making a training of therapists, workshops holders, underground therapists, and sitters and total amateurs who are doing this work. We need to get some kind of information out to raise a public opinion, and that'll be a nice counter side from the scientific approach that is advocated at this conference.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think we would need to use the last 30 seconds or maybe 60 seconds for final reflections from our panel, starting with Alex.
So I was just going to thank the gentleman, and I was going to ask, are there any professional lobbyists in the audience? Okay, we need them.
One over there.
Okay, we'll talk later.
Thank you. Renske.
No, I saw like 3 seconds on the thing, so I will pass the mic.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's a combination of research and science and advocacy and patients doing it.
I just want to say we have to all stay humble learners. We haven't figured this out yet. Really, it's the path, not the destination. Pay attention to the details along the way, interconnect, report, share. This is how we're going to get it right if we work as a community, not as siloed countries, what have you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.